There's a team out west that has a cool factor that soars through the roof. And it's not just because there's a number one next to their name these days.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
If you are 18 years of age or somewhere around there where you're graduating high school and moving on to college, all you've known is Oregon being a top 15, a top 10, a top 5 type of program within college football, but it hadn't always been that way. Oregon is the coolest program in all of college football now because they use that cool factor to stick out in the late 90s and the early 2000s. This Ducks program is the OG of cool. Of course, it all started in December of 1998 when they unveiled that O logo that they have now put their stamp on, that they now own as the O in college athletics. That is also when they upped their uniform game to a completely different level. And of course, they innovated offensively about 6 to 7 years later when Chip Kelly was the offensive coordinator and eventually became the head coach of this program. When you're not a blue blood, when you're not Michigan, and you're not Ohio State, when you're not Alabama, when you're not one of these great football powerhouses that you can rely on the history, you can rely on the tradition, how do you become in the same conversation when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to media attention? How do you generate that? Oregon and their cool factor with uniforms, with offense, and their marketing and branding and Nike is what has propelled Oregon to this type of level. You look at this Ducks program before December of 1998, and it was a middle of the road, upper of the middle of the road Pac-10 program. Prior to 1998, the Ducks were ranked at the end of the season just 3 times in the entire history of their program. Before 1999, they won 9 games just 5 times in their history. So Oregon becoming this really coolest program in college football is not something that has happened within the last couple of years with this success and the move to the Big Ten. This is something that has been 20 or so years in the making. Now let's fast forward to present day. And let's talk about the cool factor now. Because the cool factor now is a lot different than it was in the late 90s or the early 2000s when a Joey Harrington billboard was in Times Square. What is different about now than it was back then? Internet, social media. And that's where I want to start with these cool factors. What is one way, why is cool important, is to be able to reach the younger generation, to be able to recruit the younger generation and the elite talent within the younger generation, to take your brand as a program and use all of the resources that you can, that Oregon has built up, to be able to be consistently be in these recruiting battles and win these recruiting battles, which they have been able to do for elite talent. There is a guy that contributes to this factor and this marketing and this branding and this cool factor, maybe as much as some of the coaches that you know, as some of the players that you know. There's a guy by the name of Scott Anderson. Scott Anderson is the director of video for Oregon football. Scott Anderson came to the University of Oregon in August of 2023. You know what else started around that time? Ducks versus them. Ducks versus them is the gold standard of cinematic recaps in all of college football. The access that they are granted by this coaching staff and the stories that they tell, nobody else does it in college football the way they do it. Social media is the largest way to reach a mass audience. And the best way to engage with said mass audience is great video content. And the Ducks do it better than anybody. It's not only Ducks versus them, though. You look at this offseason, you talk about That Team Out West documentary, the Rooted in Substance documentary talking about the relationship between the University of Oregon and Nike. This video team produces amazing content. These are the type of things that catches the attention, not only of kids in the recruiting process, but other folks around the country that look at this content and view Oregon as that top-level, top-notch type of program. There are certainly other teams that do cinematic recaps very well, but nobody does it like Ducks versus them. It is the true gold standard in that category. When it comes to the standard in another category, you can't talk about Oregon and the cool factor without talking about uniforms. Okay, so Oregon has always had innovative uniforms ever since they made that switch, as I said, in the late 90s. The innovation is a word that has described this Oregon program. Uniforms, offense, right? It is just an innovative football program. And the uniforms have been at the forefront of all of that. I'm going to tell a personal story. You see this shirt that I'm wearing right now? This shirt was purchased in about 2009, 2010. A kid in the middle of Wisconsin that had been a Midwest football fan was captured by the uniform game that Oregon sported, and it captured my eye and drew my attention to Oregon football. And I became a secondary fan of the Ducks at that very moment in time. And I think this is when we talk about what's the big deal about the cool factor. That's a personal example that I can share, where the coolness of these Oregon uniforms attracted my eye halfway across the country when they were playing in a different regional conference at that point in time. Now, when you fast forward to 2024, the Generation O uniforms are elite. This is the best combination, in my opinion, that they have had ever. They had their uniform game here. They have taken it all the way up here. Their uniforms this year are absolutely fantastic. We talked about it with the video and the social media, right? These are things that draws kids' attention. Uniforms is another things that kids care about. Oregon has always had a modern uniform look, but this year they've done a phenomenal job at balancing a traditional looking uniform with the more modern looking uniforms. For those of you on video, you can see it, but on the left side of your screen, you have a more traditional looking uniform set with the green and the O on the side of the helmet, which returned to the Oregon uniform this year. But you've got solid green, solid white, solid yellows on the jerseys, on the pants, which speaks more to the Big Ten type of uniform. The Michigans, the Ohio States, the Nebraskas, the Wisconsins, the Iowas, right? Solid colors, stripes, very simple, but still a very substantial uniform set. So they have that more traditional uniform, and then of course they've had the modern uniforms, those great black uniforms with the green accent that they wore against Ohio State, warp speed that they wore against the Michigan Wolverines this season. The uniform game was already great. They've taken it to a whole nother level, certainly this season. Uniforms is one reason why you want to come play at Oregon. Another reason that takes the cool factor to another level is the stadium atmosphere and the fans. Look, I've never been to a game with an Autzen Stadium. I am working on people that have been there and what they have told me, and then what I can see and what I can take in from a television standpoint. If you're a great high school player, you want to play in an electric atmosphere. Dan Lanning said it before the Ohio State game. He said it after the Ohio State game. This is why you come to Oregon. And he referenced the atmosphere. Being in the Big Ten and that game against Ohio State, I think did a ton for the Oregon Ducks. And it's all about what the fans were able to make Autzen Stadium. You and I both know Autzen Stadium has been a fantastic home field advantage for the Oregon Ducks for some time now. But I think being on that stage, having that exposure on NBC in the game of the week against a team like Ohio State took that cool factor from a stadium atmosphere standpoint and turned it up to 11. You look at the quote, for those of you on video, you can see it. For those of you on audio, I'll certainly recite it right now. But, quote, the Big Ten's loudest stadium is in Eugene, Oregon. That from CBS Sports' Josh Pate. I mean, he's been to a lot of these Big Ten stadiums. And for him to say that, and for that atmosphere to be able to be praised like that, says a lot. When you look at uniforms and when you look at being in huge games in the Big Ten and playing in front of a raucous atmosphere that is louder than stadiums twice its size, like the 100Kers in the Big Ten, like the Michigans of the world, like the Ohio States of the world, like the maybe Penn States of the world. That says a lot about the fan base. I can speak personally about the fan base. Since I've been putting out Oregon content on this channel and on this show, Oregon fans have been the best. Oregon fans have been fantastic. I will say this about Duck fans. They are a very knowledgeable fan base, and they're very educated about the game of football. And I think that certainly translates into what these crowds have become. So you got all of these great things that makes Oregon cool and have made Oregon cool for some time. And Oregon has a tremendous amount of resources. But there's one thing, one cool factor that ties it all together. And it's Mr. Cool coaching this football program. It's Dan Lanning. Like, Dan Lanning just seems like a guy that I would want to go out and have a beer with and just talk about football for hours and hours and hours. He has that infectious personality. He has that energy. He has that passion. You can tell it during his press conferences. You can certainly tell it during some of the interviews that he did this offseason as well. Like, he ties all of these islands and makes them a country. All right, Oregon has always had these things. They've always had the great uniforms. They've always had the facilities. They've always had the Nike partnership. They needed somebody to take advantage of the full effect that all of these things bring. Of course, you had Chip Kelly, who had the innovation on offense, but Chip Kelly was not able to maybe recruit at as high a level, certainly as Dan Lanning. You have somebody like a Mario Cristobal, who was able to recruit at a very high level, but the in-game coaching had a lot left of food on the table. Ask Miami about that. Dan Lanning is a guy that has experience in the SEC, right? And he's made this team so much better and bigger and badder up front on the line of scrimmage, and he's made them such a complete football program. He has taken all of the resources. He has granted access to Scott Anderson and his video team of having coach comms on their Ducks versus them, team meetings on their Ducks versus them videos as well. And he knows what all of the things that need to be done to build a great program in 2024. He takes advantage of every single resource that is made available to him and his football program. He has packaged it into a rocket that is launching into the stratosphere right now. Now, I believe Oregon is the coolest program in college football. It is subjective to me. There have been things throughout my time that have spoken to me. There are things about Oregon that speak to me more than maybe they do you. I want to hear your thoughts on all things Oregon and their cool factor. Is there something I left out? Is there cool factors about another team, maybe within the Big Ten or in all of college football, that could compete with Oregon? Leave all your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.